Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today, we're going to be exploring the woods. What's new here? Today's stories are strange, unexplainable, and creepy. But if you have a story that you would like to hear in a future video, and you haven't shared it yet, what are you waiting for? Submit your story at swampdweller.net, or the email you can find in the description down below to hear your story in a future video. Now, without further hesitation, let's get into these creepy stories sent in by viewers just like you. My buddy D's family owned some property in a rural area around Nashville, Tennessee. His land backs up to a 3x3 mile stretch of land that are federally owned. There are caves back in those woods that ancient people used to live in, and there are other artifacts around, like stonework and stuff like that. I even think that there are burial mounds. Most of these caves were all closed up in the 70s and 80s, but my friend's grandma, who has lived on the property since the 40s, said she doesn't ever go into the woods or the caves because there are monsters out there. I'm 32 now, and the paranormal and cryptid activity has been going on for years, but my first experience when I was just 11 years old. They call it the Gremlin because of the red eyes. I just went outside to pee when I was 11 on the side of the house. Suddenly, I heard knocking and banging from around the corner. I thought it was just my friend or sister pranking me, trying to scare me. I said, "Cut it out, guys," and walked around the corner to find what looked like an oversized owl with red glowing eyes. As soon as I saw it, it hissed and screamed at me. Chills ran up my body. I was so scared, I honestly started crying, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I ran back into the house to tell my parents what had happened, when they replied, "Oh, you must have seen the Gremlin." Later that night, I fell asleep on the pallet of blankets on my friend's bedroom floor. I forgot about it and woke up in the middle of the night to see the red eyes looking at me through the window. The window is above the front porch on the second-story awning. I started screaming bloody murder, and whatever it was bipedal, and you could hear it stomping off on the tin roof. We probably heard 7 or 8 good steps crunching the tin roof before it jumped off. His dad came in and scolded me for yelling and waking everyone up. I told him what I saw, and he said, "Yep, the Gremlin's interested in you." Little did I know that I would see this creature or shapeshifter several more times over the next 20 years. Fast forward to 2005. My friend, who we will call D, told me he was walking through his woods and saw a 4-foot floating glowing orange orb. He said that's all he remembers before he lost time and blanked out. He said he stared at it and then woke up hours later in the woods at 10 p.m. and it was dark. He was laying out there for over 5 hours, and he suffers from seizures to this day. And no doctor really knows why he started having these seizures. This story has meaning 9 years later, and I'll explain why. The next encounters were in late 2012, eerily around the last month before the Mayan calendar event. I went through an abusive, toxic relationship and felt comfortable walking around the woods and being away from people, battling my depression and my thoughts. We would often stay out there at night in our blind and drink some shine and live off turkey meat. We did not forget the strange things out there, so we would bring an arsenal of weapons and ammo with us, each having 7 .62x39 rifles, 2 shotguns, 2 pistols, and 2 revolvers. This one night, in particular, we brought our buddy Jay with us. We huddled around a fire, passing popcorn Sutton's moonshine, when my friend D, in mid-conversation, suddenly stood up and unloaded a clip from a 9mm into a tree. Me and Jay fell over, our ears ringing. After a bunch of what the heck cussing, he then saw a bipedal black silhouette peering out from the tree looking at us. We spot-lit the field with a trigger spotlight, and we saw a black cat walking across the field, almost dragging itself. It's definitely some sort of shapeshifter. It has to be. We continued drinking and kinda laughed it off. This is where it gets weird. We never fall asleep out there, because we know what lurks, but for some reason, we fell asleep this time. Around the fire, I woke up to a wet nose, and it was a coyote licking my face. But it didn't look like a coyote. It was some deformed dog. And this time, I woke up and freaked out. I let off 5 rounds of buckshot after it scurried away. The gunshots woke up everyone, and we heard an extreme loud growl after the gunshot ceased. We booked it out of there and went to sleep in the house. 2 days later, I was at Dee's waiting for him to get off work, standing in his driveway, and suddenly, once again, everything went silent. It was 8 p.m., so it was dark, but in the moonlight, I saw a black cat that was as big as Bagheera from Lion King walking my direction. I had a .357 Magnum on a holster, and I fired 1 shot. Then it looked at me with yellowish eyes, and I swear it jumped at least 60-degree angle 50 feet into a tree. It let off a god-awful scream. There are no mountain lions on this property, and there are no mountain lions anywhere near where we live. We do have bobcats, but they're not black. This inhuman jump scared the crap out of me too, and I ran into my friend's house and told him that the Gremlin's back. About a week after that scary experience, I have refused to enter the woods. Me and Dee were sitting in the blind smoking a little bit of some of the, good stuff, and suddenly, it sounded like a woman was screaming. It sounded like a woman getting murdered, screaming for help. We looked at each other with no words, and we noped out of there. As we were on the trail leaving, we heard 30 or 40 disembodied voices talking and moaning. It was like we were hearing 30 people die at the same time. I asked my friend what he thinks happened, and he said he has no idea. He thinks it could be connected to skinwalkers or some sort of native legend. There were other stories of this property back in the day. Other friends said they were playing hide and seek and saw an invisible man walking through the woods. But thank you for sharing my story. I was happy to tell someone this. This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending liberal art school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks. 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. They all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held to each other, and we held each other up, and made the whole experience more enjoyable. At the beginning of the sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, famous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene a bit. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left on the main road, driving for 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting intentionally lost. Our cars made a turn. To our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see exactly what this was. We stepped over the log and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set on the trail. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods. Unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched, I just kept getting more anxious. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I tried my best to shrug it off as my imagination and nothing more. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared, was it not? Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What we came across, we should be able to take down. We headed down this trail for 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing. And I mean massive. It was a large open field of unkept grass. Comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounding the entire field, which was so large we could not see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The windows and the doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards a narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped and he pointed. We all slowly turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically, a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm and whispered, "What the heck is that?" What happened next sent shockwaves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight towards us. Without even thinking, we freaked out and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy crap!" I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to the 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling out in closer to 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked that everyone was okay. My heart was pounding. I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a text to the others with something along the lines of, "The woods. That really happened, right?" And it most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night though. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning and ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, he came for us that night, and you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around to see what he was truly capable of. Before I get to the story, I want to give some background information. My town is pretty isolated, about 5 minutes of driving through the nearby forest to get to the next town. My town was relatively small and was bordered by all forest. Our cemetery was a decent size, probably about 20 football fields or so. It was a Friday night, and me and my friends Jake and Alex were biking on the dimly lit street next to the cemetery. Now, the cemetery is elevated about 15 feet above the street, so we couldn't see into it. Jake mentioned that we bring our bikes up there and explore. We had flashlights mounted to our bikes, so it didn't really seem like a bad idea. We walked up the stairs and immediately I got an eerie feeling when we got to the top. It was about 10 p.m. at this point, so it was pitch black. The cemetery was incredibly dark. There were no lights. We couldn't see anything past where our flashlights illuminated. We weren't really the type to get scared of things like this, because we weren't doing anything wrong, so we liked to capture a lot of it on video from our GoPro. We started down the main road, and were headed to a small pond on the other side of the cemetery. Maybe halfway down the road is when we heard the first scream. It was distant, but noticeable. It sounded like a man screaming out of fear. This didn't really faze us. Unfortunately, this is the one time I didn't bring my GoPro with me. About 10 seconds later, there was another scream. Still distant, but slightly more noticeable, likely due to the fact that we were listening this time. Instead of turning back, I heard Alex shifting gears and pedaling towards the direction of the screams, which was conveniently in the direction of the pond. I didn't want to argue, and also didn't want to look lame, so I followed, and so did Jake. I caught up in no time, and a minute later we reached the pond trail entrance. Now it was even darker in the woods here, and if I said it was pitch black, that would honestly be an understatement. At this point, it was entirely black, blacker than black. Our flashlights pretty much made no difference. All you could hear was the crunching of the leaves under us. We reached the pond and saw a light from the other side. When we turned a small corner of the land, we saw it. It was a group of maybe 10 people, dressed in what looked like black cloaks or something straight out of a cult movie. It was barely visible, but you can see the figures contrasting against the raging fire. We couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like they had someone tied up to the docks, hanging above the water. They were motionless and were probably the ones we heard the screams from. All of us were surprised. We turned and looked at each other. This odd group of people was absolutely up to no good. I wish I was lying when I say this, but when we started examining these people, they started making loud noise, hitting rocks and freaking out. We heard yelling coming from the guy in the black cloak in the center. We started booking it after that. We heard dirt bikes or something like that revving in the distance and knew they were coming our way. Instead of running, we threw our bikes in the brush halfway down the trail and jumped in the thick and thorny bushes. It hurt like hell, but was definitely worth living. Not even 30 seconds later, about 6 or 7 dirt bikes passed us slowly and quietly. We waited until they came back again, and waited another hour and about 15 minutes to leave. We booked it out of there and went to my house for the night. None of us know who these people are and why they never did anything or said anything to us. I'm just glad that they didn't try to get us and they didn't look closer. Whatever happened though, and whoever they were, hasn't made anything else happen since, and we haven't brought it up to the police because we were honestly afraid what would happen to us if we did. This happened when I was 12 years old and might need some backstory to make a little bit of sense. So, at the time, I was a young girl about to start high school. Now I had some anxiety from the stress of changing schools and some family trouble. But it didn't make things any easier for me trying to adjust to a new school, So, my mother is from Nova Scotia and my father is from Europe. We were staying in a cabin in Nova Scotia. I won't say exactly where, but it was a place where we stayed almost every summer, so I was used to sleeping there. The cabin is located on the water, but with another property on one side and a patch of forest on the other. This happened one day in August, but I can't seem to remember the exact day. At the time, my father was away, visiting a friend, so it was just me, my twin sister, who we'll just call Annabelle, and my little brother, we'll call him Thomas, and my mother Amanda. Of course, none of these are their real names. So I was listening to my iPad. I don't remember exactly what I was listening to, and I was looking out the window at the forest. For the longest time, it was just forest, nothing for me to be alarmed about. But after an hour or so, I saw something in the woods. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of car headlights on the leaves, but when I kept looking at it, I realized there were two large, very interesting eyes. They were gray and oval-shaped. I didn't know what to do at first. I was paralyzed. I slowly walked away from the window, and the eyes shifted their gaze, as whatever it was disappeared into the woods. I was shaken, but decided not to tell anyone. I tried to rationalize it as just being a reflection, as I thought before. I didn't see anything else for the rest of the night, but the next morning is when I really got a scare. I was sleeping in a room with my brother and my mother, while my sister slept down the hall. It was very hot, so I was having trouble sleeping. At around 4 o'clock in the morning, I had a strange dream. It was one of those dreams where you're just running, but you don't really know why. Except this time, I did know what I was running from. I didn't need to look back to know what I was running from. It was the creature from the woods. It was chasing me on all fours from the sound of it. The dream only lasted a few seconds, but the worst part was when I woke up. My heart was beating faster than it ever had before, and I could barely open my eyes. No matter how hard I tried, I felt as though something was holding them closed. All I could do was sit there and hear my heart beating, but I could also hear this other sound. It sounded like heavy, raspy breath mixed with shrill screaming. After about 15 seconds, that felt like 15 minutes, I could open my eyes again. But I almost wish I hadn't. When I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, 7-foot-tall creature slowly going out the doors of the room. The creature's skin was a light gray and looked not scaly, but almost that of a frog's. Its mouth stretched across its face. When it opened its mouth, it opened much wider than any human could. It didn't look at me as it walked out of the room, and I just stared at it as it walked down the stairs and right through the locked front door. I didn't sleep much after that, and in the morning, I decided not to tell my family about it, since they did not see or hear the creature, and I did not want them to think I was insane or to ridicule me. I wish I could say that was the end of it. But, sadly, this was not the last time I have ever seen this creature. Later that summer, we were back in our apartment. Now, our apartment looks over a street with 6 lanes, so there's almost always at least one car on that stretch of road, even late at night. So the other night this took place, it was around 11 o'clock, and I was the only one in our living room. I was about to go to bed when I noticed something unusual outside of my window. The street outside was completely empty, not even a parked car. But what I did see still makes me shudder whenever I think about it. The creature from the cabin was slowly walking down the road. At first, it just walked down the road and then stopped. Slowly, and to my horror, it turned its head to make eye contact with me. Our apartment building has many levels, and it was at least 60 feet from our building. It met my eyes exactly. This lasted for about 5 seconds. Then, it looked away, and I ran to my bed as fast as I could. To this day, I still don't know what I saw those 2 nights, and if anyone has any idea what I saw, I would love to know. I haven't seen this creature again, and I hope I never see anything like that, ever again. Before I begin, you need to know the situation. I lived in northeast Minnesota. Actually, my parents' property was very close to the Oshawa Reservation. So, I lived and went to a Native American school. I lived on a 365-acre farm with my 3 brothers and 3 sisters, me being the youngest. Our farmhouse was old when we moved in. We had a dirt root cellar, an outhouse, no central air, and, just typically an older home. This all happened back in the late 1970s. And as I said, we had a fairly large family. I am talking a real farm. Lots of cattle we had to milk, lots of pigs we butchered and sold along with the cows, not used for milk, horses, chickens, etc. We had a garden of our own, the statement of a real farm. We would sell wood we cut and chopped for winter, working people's fields baling hay, and of course our own farm. Our property must have directly abutted the Chippewa Reservation because at one point they tried to seize our property, claiming it as reservation property. Neither here nor there, but the fact remains to possibly explain my two big Great Danes, big farm, big dogs. I was small and had tied a piece of twine around one of the Great Danes' neck. Margot was her name, to take a walk down the driveway. The dog's sole purpose at this time was to protect me from anything. The driveway was a couple of 100 meters. We had a pasture on each side, but being little, I was just having fun being out in the middle of nowhere, controlling some massive animal. On the sides of the driveway, before the fencing, we had both farm equipment, and being in Minnesota, we had a couple of ice houses used for fishing on the ice during the winter when you dig a hole in the ice and fish through it. Next to the ice houses was a horse tie. It was about 8 to 10 feet long, straight top, held by 2 poles on the ends, just to tie a horse to and put saddles and such on them. While walking down the driveway, standing behind the horse tie was a huge creature, with its hand and fingers on top of the wood overlaying it. So the fingers were visible, standing to look at me and the dog. This thing was taller than the fish house, so I guessed that it was easily 8 feet tall. All I could see, because it scared me so bad, was hair and teeth. Being 6 or 7 at the time, I thought my job was to protect the dog, and she had placed herself between me and the creature growling at it. I tried to pull her, but she wouldn't budge. I tugged and began crying at this point, and finally was able to get her to run with me back to the house. As soon as we reached the house, I let go of Margot, ran inside and told my mom what I had seen. The boys, all older than me, grabbed their shotguns to go find this quote-unquote bear. They ran out into the woods, and I didn't have a single clue what this thing was, so the boys all figured, out in the woods, it had to be a bear. I was sitting on my mom's lap. She had got me a glass of water to drink, but I was trembling so badly I couldn't take a sip, spilling more than I could even drink. Explaining to her that what I saw wasn't a bear. At the time, I did not know of Bigfoot, and it didn't occur to me until later that what I saw was likely a Bigfoot. In our culture, Bigfoot is not a savage, more of a protector of the woods, truth, and honesty. And I find it quite a coincidence that with the feud going on between the tribe and our family's farm, that such a creature would stop in to check us out. The boys all came back, not seeing any bear in the woods and teasing me for being so frightened by nothing. I swear I saw something that was so big, all I could do was cry. I don't see ghosts or spirits, I don't see UFOs or aliens, I am quite practical, scientific, and you better let me see it if you want me to believe you. But this was tops for strange and unusual. Now I listen to a lot of swamp dweller stories during the day, listening while I work, and I know this creature I saw, in my view, posed no threat to me. It didn't run me out of the woods. It didn't growl or scream at me, just simply observed. I do not tell people this story because it makes me sound crazy, but I am very sane. My job requires a lot of attention to detail. I preserve the past for future generations to learn, so my interpretation is important, and I'm very good at my job. What I saw that summer was not some homeless man, it was not some big bear, and not my imagination. I had no idea that there was any danger in my encounter, but I also had no idea that Bigfoot was even living there. But I guess, you should expect Bigfoot to be living anywhere. Wow, these were some genuinely creepy stories from the woods. Thank you to everybody who sent in these stories. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, be sure to send in your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day, and all of things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the swamp. I can't thank you guys enough. We're getting pretty close to our next milestone here, which is pretty sick. If you guys made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by answering this question. What do you find more scary, being lost in the woods or being lost in the desert? I would love to know. See you guys soon with another creepy video.